Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the 10th part of What If Deku Had a Game Inventory Quirk. Quite a journey so far, If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 37. Izuku and his team walked into the waiting room, grinning at the slew of familiar faces watching the entrance. Nice work, 1A. Congratulations on a full passing rate. Yoarashi grinned widely. I found so many passionate people. They were great. Almost a shame I made them all fail. Ashido choked on her spit. Wait, are you saying you're the guy who eliminated 120 people at the same time? Yoarashi smirked. Well, I didn't exactly count the number of people on that street, but I did get them all at once with their own balls, so I think that's a safe bet. A taller girl standing next to him whistled. Damn, bro, safe. That's high-key impressive for a first year. Lit. Izuku stared at her for a couple seconds. Do you need a vibe check, or is that your normal behavior? The girl snorted. You're pretty lit too, bro, safe. What's your name? Izuku grinned and stuck his hand out. Midoriya Izuku, aka Save Point, aka 1AS class representative. I take it from your cap that you're a Shiketsu student. She shot finger guns at him. Ain't capping there. Yoarashi groaned lightheartedly and slammed his palm into his face, before quickly removing it and grinning. Midoriya, meet Utsushimi Kami. At Shiketsu, there's a lot more interaction between the different years, so we know each other better than you probably know your upperclassmen. I'm surprised you can understand her. Katsuki scoffed. The nerd's obsessed with pre-quirk culture, so I'm not surprised he's familiar with the slang. Even if it's honestly excessive. Kaminari nodded. Definitely. I mean, I consider myself a meme guy, but that's a little much, even for me. Utsushimi smirked. Cope. Izuku grinned. Seethed. The blonde Katsubutsu girl popped up and said, Enmald. Izuku whirled on the spot to grin at her. Hey, you made it? She grinned and gave a small wave. Yep. Nakagame Tatame, aka Turtleneck. I also go by Master Rashi online. Izuku gasped with delight and pointed at her. You're that Wendy main that I kept running into in Smash Ultimate tourneys. She pointed back at him, still grinning. And you're that Bush Boss guy who mains Ivysaur. Oh man, this is great. Before they could geek out any further, the loudspeakers turned on, and Mara announced, we now have our first 100 passers. All of those still on the field, please make your way towards the doors leading to the stands. After the field is cleared, you'll have 5 minutes to prepare yourselves while we rearrange. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Rearrange. Nakagame tossed up a salute. Well, it's been nice meeting ya, but I gotta get back to the rest of us who managed to pass. Thanks for not taking me out when your team stormed our class, by the way. Izuku grinned. Don't mention it. Us nerds have to stick together. As she ran off, Utsushimi stuck up a peace sign and said, I high-key gotta get back to my crew. Peace. Izuku tossed out a thumbs up as the other girl turned and wandered off into the crowd. Turning around, he placed his hands on his hips and pursed his lips as he glanced up at the large screen showing the testing field. So, the first half was mainly focused on speed and combat, fighting other examines quickly to pass before anyone else. What do you think they'll test next? Katsuki huffed. Probably something about saving people. After all, Rule 1 of Heroics dash. Prioritize the rescue, the class recited in harmony. Up in the stands, Shouta felt vaguely proud of his class for something other than getting through the first half together. He couldn't quite place why, though. Suddenly, the ground rumbled, and Izuku's attention snapped to the large screen as the field suddenly crumbled. Buildings collapsed, a landslide wrecked the waterfall, the industrial sector fell apart, and the mountain range. Well, there wasn't much to make the mountain range even more ruined after what Shindo did to it. What the heck? Mara announced, the first half tested your fighting prowess. As such, the second half will test your ability to save. The scenario is as follows, a recent villain attack has left this area in shambles. Your task is to rescue the various civilians trapped and injured out there. Once we open up, It's up to all 100 of you to decide how to handle it. Oh, and don't worry about the civilians, they're volunteers from the Help Us group, an organization of professional actors. Izuku hummed. That's a big area. We're going to need to coordinate, not just among the class, but between the different schools, too. Katsuki huffed. Good luck with that. A lot of them seem to hate us for surviving the USJ. Yoarashi frowned. That's stupid. Why would they hate you for getting attacked on school grounds? Izuku shrugged. No 1B and the Gen Ed classes were the same, even declaring war on us before the sports festival. I genuinely have no clue why people seem to think that we wanted that to happen and are flaunting it. Still, if we want to make this efficient and quick, we need to coordinate with them. Nakagame appeared out of the crowd. I can help with that. Katsubutsu's got a good reputation, so we'd have better chances of everyone coordinating if it's one of us pitching the idea instead of you guys. Shame, but it's the truth. Izuku grinned. Works for me. As long as the civilians get rescued. The waiting room fell apart, and Shouta grinned with pride as his class immediately shot out into the field, spreading out to maximize area coverage. The other schools did much the same, but a little later. And, as usual, the UA students who survive the first half are the first out on the field. Emmy frowned at the remains of the waiting room, where one of her students was standing and barking out instructions for some of the remaining students. Huh. I wasn't expecting Tatama to be the one to take charge. Usually it's Yo or Shikui who does that kind of thing. Then again, they didn't make it to the second phase, so I guess she's picking up the slack or something. Shouten nodded in satisfaction as Itza began ferrying civilians from his classmates to the medical station that was being set up in the remains of the waiting room. Good thinking. Get the fastest ones to get the civilians out of harm's way in case a villain decides to make a move. Suddenly, part of the wall opposite the waiting room exploded, and several figures streamed out of the hole, including the unmistakable figure of Gang Orca. Mara announced, I said that this area had been hit by a villain attack. I never said that the villains had left for good. Shouta placed a hand on his chest. Ah, a logical ruse after my own heart. Emmy snorted, and Shouta grinned as he mentally added another point to the running tally they kept of instances where one had made the other laugh. That's 25 to 53 in her favor. Keep spending time with the Hellspawn, and I might start to catch up. Izuku hummed in thought as he considered the new threat of Gang Orca and his minions. He ran through a few mental calculations, before raising a hand to his headphones. Who's not currently evacuating civilians? After a few seconds of silence, he winced. Okay, yeah, dumb question. Who's in Gang Orca's area? Okako responded, I'm close, but I'm currently busy trying to lift a building off of a group of civilians in the apartments zone. Jack Sabbath is with me, but she needs to get them out from underneath. Katsuki growled, I'd help, but I'm currently stuck by the landslide area helping dig people out of the wreckage. Which is dumb, because explosions aren't gonna help anything. Can anyone take over for me? Kirishima fired back, I would, but I'm over by the highway ruins helping Baker's Dozen and Tentacle move this debris. Kauta called, give me a few seconds and I can get over there, save point. I just need to get this man out of these pipes and to where Ignition can pick him up. Tsu responded, I'm busy over here in the skyscraper, Kuro. There are too many people on the different floors, and Cellophane and I are the only ones who can reliably move vertically. Yoarashi called, I would love to fight, but I am currently needed to move this rubble in the downtown area. Hitachi grunted, I'm caught up in the industrial zone. They need my capture scarf to move the pipes. Also, these Seijin guys are getting really annoying to work with. I think they've got a grudge against me from the first half. Kaminari shouted, I'm busy providing power to the medical station. These guys brought some neat equipment, but they didn't pack their own generator, so I'm stuck. Itza announced, I need to ferry the injured, so I cannot be spared to deal with the villains. Aoyama called, my Quirk is needed to provide light in the wreckage of the downtown area, monsieur. I must remain here. Ashido responded, I'm busy melting through the rubble of the highway, so I can't help you there. Ajiro grunted, I can be spared, but I'm not fast enough to get there in time to reasonably help. Besides, Gang Orca's Sonic Blast could easily put me out of commission. Fumikage called, Dark Shadow's claws are necessary to dig out the injured from the landslide area. I cannot be of assistance with the villains. Hagakure shouted, even if I managed to get close, there's no way I'd be able to help with someone that big. Besides, I've got my hands full over here in the residential area with hauling people to safe zones. Izuku sighed. Alright then. Anima, see what you can do about getting here quickly, but don't rush too fast. I should be able to hold them off long enough for any civilians in the area to be relocated. He quickly fired up his extreme gear and raced between the collapsed buildings, shooting out in front of the horde and skidding to a stop between them and the civilians. Gang Orcus coughed. They send one child to stop me and my minions. How pitiful. Come, then. Test your mettle against us. Izuku equipped his Meta Knight sword, allowing the mask to cover his face. Don't bother dropping a save. This is game over for you. 30 minutes later. Izuku felt tears well up in his eyes as he stared down at the plastic card in his hands. I did it. I actually did it. Katsuki clapped him on the back. Damn right, you did. Probably the first time an entire class of first years has passed the provisional license exam. And we couldn't have done it without you. A familiar voice called out, darn straight. Izuku turned and grinned as Utsushimi walked up, dressed in her school uniform. That would have been high-key scary if we'd had to deal with the big bad ourselves. Thanks for the hand, Brosafe. Izuku smirked. Not a problem. I couldn't call myself a hero if I couldn't protect people. Utsushimi grinned and held out a piece of paper with numbers written on it. Here's my number. Totes call me if you've got a sec. Izuku stuck it in his pocket. I'll consider it. The older girl stuck up a peace sign and jogged off towards her waiting classmates. One of them glared over at the class, and Kauta smirked and signed something in his direction. The teen immediately started screeching something, only to be cut off by the large student covered in hair. He had to be physically dragged to his bus, kicking and screaming. Katsuki raised an eyebrow at Kauta, who had his hands in his pockets and a smirk on his face. What'd you sign at him? Even I'm not that good at riling people up. Kauta chuckled. What I signed didn't really matter. In the first half, I made him think that I was mute, then yelled to signal Ashido to melt the road out from under his feet. So he's already mad at me for that. But to really rub it in, I signed, your mother was a hamster and your father smelled of elderberries. I don't think he understands sign language, but it was worth it anyway. Izuku snorted, and the rest of the hero hopefuls started cracking up. The rest of the class looked on in confusion as Aizawa-sensei walked up. Alright, Hellspawn, good work today. Now let's get back to UA, there's a new opportunity available to you now that you have your provisional licenses. The class started groaning, only to go silent when the hero held a hand up. I never said that was going to happen immediately. He held up his phone with a grin, open to a text conversation. I let Mike know that you all passed, and there's about 10 pizzas waiting back at the dorms. The class cheered and charged towards the bus, somehow having enough presence of mind to file on in an orderly fashion. Izuku shook his head in mock disappointment, before glancing sidelong at his teacher. You told Mike to order the pizzas the second we all passed the first half, didn't you? Aizawa-sensei smirked. I might have. I might not have. I also might tell you if you get on the bus and stop asking questions. Izuku grinned and ran towards the bus, clutching his new provisional license tightly. Mom's gonna flood the apartment when I send her a photo. Toshinori poked his head in, sighing when he noticed that nothing had changed with young Yaoyorozu. Shozenji-san walked up to him, clipboard in hand. I've told you before, Toshinori, I'll let you know if her state changes at all. You don't need to keep checking on her. Toshinori sighed. I know, but I just can't help myself. Every time I try to keep the thought out of my mind, something draws me here to check on her. The fact that she looks so much like Nana doesn't help, either. Shozenji-san frowned and glanced at the sleeping girl. After a few seconds, she hummed to herself. For once, I see what you mean. There's definitely a resemblance. Maybe I should send a DNA sample to Tsukachi. Toshinori shook his head. After learning about young Tenko, I don't think my heart could handle learning of another relative of hers, even if she's a fine young woman. Shozenji-san shrugged. Suit yourself. By the way, I think Nightai was looking for you earlier. Something about potential interns among the first year classes. Toshinori hummed. I see. Thank you, Shozenji-san. She patted his knee, thankfully without her cane. "Get moving, you oaf. I don't want you peering over my shoulder while I check her vitals." Chapter 38. As the exam had been on a Thursday, the first-year hero students were given Friday off to rest, relax, and recover from the day's events. Monoma had come over to brag that 1B had only gotten 3 failures, only to fall silent when all of 1A pulled out their provisional licenses in unison. Kenda showed up to collect the blonde, and Izuku congratulated her on her class high passing rate, citing the numbers that 1A had faced and how 1B had surely faced similar numbers with similar success. Come Monday, classes had resumed as normal. Lunch was a quiet affair, with 1A wondering what could be coming next for them. When the bell rang to signal the start of afternoon classes, Aizawa-sensei walked into the room to complete silence. He walked up to the podium and announced, "Right, now that you all have your provisional licenses, there's a new avenue available to you, work studies. Think of them as the next step from your internships. While internships were required and offers were sent to you, work studies are optional and require you to request a position at an agency yourself. Of course, the best way to learn about something is to learn from an expert, so I've asked 3 third years to come in today and talk to you about work studies." He turned towards the door and called, "You can come in now." The door slid open, and Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized the 3 students that entered. Togata Mirio, Heidu Nejire, and Amajiki Tamaki, UA's current Big 3. Amajiki stepped forward as though he was about to say something, but suddenly turned around and planted his face in the corner, muttering something about potatoes. Heidu patted him on the back, before whirling around with a smile on her face. She immediately started flitting from person to person, asking questions at a breakneck pace that even Izuku struggled to keep up with. After a little while, Togata cleared his throat, which drew Heidu back to the front. He walked up to the podium and looked over the class with a grin. "So, you guys are the first class of first years to pass the exam, huh? Pretty exciting. You know, with villain activity rising after Kamino, things look pretty grim, huh?" He stuck out a finger. "Well, that's where we come in. It's up to us as up-and-coming heroes to make everyone feel safer, right?" Dead silence. Someone coughed awkwardly. Amajiki mumbled, "I knew we should have just drawn up a PowerPoint." Togata frowned. "Wow, tough crowd, huh? Maybe my public speaking skills need work. So, it seems like you guys value action over words, huh? Fine by me. What ya say to a little sparring match, at 19-1, all of you against me? How about it?" The class perked up, and Katsuki grinned maniacally as he slammed a fist into his palm. "Now we're talkin'." Togata grinned back. "That's more like it. Grab your gym uniforms and meet me in Gym Gamma." It spoke to their levels of excitement how quickly they got changed. They were ready and filing into Gym Gamma in less than a minute. True to his word, Togata was already standing there and going through some basic stretches. "Looks to me like you guys already know not to waste time. Good, that'll make this go faster." Aizawa-sensei held up a hand and stepped forward. "Before we begin, is there anyone who wants to opt out of this?" Izuku frowned and glanced over at where Heidu was grinning enthusiastically. A little, too enthusiastically. "I think I'll sit this one out. Call it paranoia." Kauta rubbed at his chin, then squared his shoulders. Aizawa-sensei shrugged as Izuku walked over to stand next to Amajiki. "Well, I gave you an out. Don't come crying to me when this is over." Togata grinned in excitement as he stared down the class in front of him. Izuku hummed to himself and leaned towards Amajiki. "They're gonna get curb stomped, aren't they?" The upperclassman let out a whimper with an affirmative tone, and Izuku winced. Togata crossed his arms and frowned. "Kman, I thought you guys knew better than to stand still. Where's the initiative I saw during the sports festival?" Immediately, Katsuki charged forward, swinging his right palm down through the air and letting off an explosion that ripped Togata's gym shirt to shreds, but somehow missed his torso entirely. Katsuki stumbled forward, off balance, and Togata struck, slamming a muscled arm into the younger blonde's stomach. Katsuki dropped like a rock, and the thin line of restraint snapped as the rest of the class launched their own attacks. Izuku hummed and leaned against the wall of Gym Gamma as Togata proceeded to tear through 1A one by one as if they were wet paper. Attacks miss him entirely, but still affect the area around him, including his clothes. Seems to be able to teleport, but not instantaneously. There's no effect when he disappears, and no warning when he reappears. Hato leaned over, trying to figure out his quirk. Izuku nodded. Don't blame Yat. It's really cool. Togata appeared behind Kaka and chopped at the back of her neck, sending her falling to the floor unconscious. Izuku raised an eyebrow. No stomach punch? But he didn't hold back against the other girls. Hato giggled. He didn't want to make you angry by hurting your girlfriend too much. Izuku glanced over at her and raised an eyebrow. Did we really make it that obvious during the sports festival? Izuwa-sensei snorted. Problem child, you literally swept her off her feet and carried her to the field before the tournament. Anyone watching would have to be blind to not see it. Izuku grunted. Fair enough. A couple seconds later, Togata was back in his original position, pants back on, and the rest of 1A was lying on the floor in various levels of pain. Izuwa-sensei stepped forward and announced, the reason for this exercise in futility was to show you the difference a work study can make. Togata nodded. Right. What did you think of my quirk? Kaminari groaned and sat up. It's way too strong. How could you teleport and dodge all our attacks like that? Izuku spoke up, actually, it's not teleporting. What happened was, he phased through the floor, then popped up in a different location. He didn't dodge your attacks, per se, but phased through them. His uniform didn't. Togata grinned. Exactly. And while it seems strong now, it was way worse when I first got it. Back in middle school, I used to fall through the floor and get stuck in walls all the time. I had to learn to run precise calculations in my head and make predictions in order to use my quirk effectively. Those predictions come from experience, and that experience came from my work study. Okako groaned and rubbed at her stomach. You couldn't have just said that and not beat the shit out of us. Togata laughed and rubbed at the back of his neck. Maybe. But then it wouldn't have sunk in as well, would it? Katsuki coughed into his fist. Probably not. Actions speak about 10 times louder than words, after all. Togata smiled wider and snagged his shirt from the floor, frowning at the large burn hole in the front. You know, I think I'll go without this until I get to the changing rooms. He slung the shirt over his shoulder and started marching towards the doors, but paused when he reached Izuku. How'd you know that was gonna happen? Izuku pointed his thumb over at Hato. Her grin was a little too shit-eating for my liking. She snapped her fingers. Darn. Would have loved to see how you would have handled his quirk in real time. Gotta work on that. Amajiki pulled himself out of the corner and went to head towards the door, only to pause and glance over at Izuku. He hung his head and mumbled, Fat Gum wanted me to tell you that he'd love to have you back for work studies, if you're able. Izuwa-sensei hummed. Normally, we'd require students to go with a different agency to get a range of experiences, but I might be able to get Nezu to make an exception in this instance. After all, I don't think Midoriya got a chance to work with any other heroes at the agency during internships, so he could still get a different experience. I'll talk to the rat god about it. Amajiki nodded and headed for the door, followed by Togata. Hato moved to follow, then paused, and glanced back at where Katsuki was watching with interest. You worked with Mirako during internships, yeah. If you want a work study, find me later this week in ground beta after classes. Lady Ryukyu seems interested in you. She glanced over at Okako. Both of you. 1 week later. Izuku shoved open the double doors leading into the Fat Gum agency. Papa's home. Vibe Check glanced up from the paperwork on her desk and grinned widely. Save point. Glad to have you back. Who's the redhead? Kirishima grinned and slammed his fists together. Kirishima Ajaru, Red Riot? Mido Bro said I could learn a lot here. Vibe Check smirked. Well, we could certainly use a little more positivity. Her face fell. The place got pretty morose when we heard what happened to Creatai. Izuku frowned. Yeah. She's holding steady, but she hasn't shown any signs of waking up soon. We're still holding out hope, though. Vibe Check nodded solemnly. Right. Boss man's waiting for you in his office. Save point, show Red Riot the way. Izuku nodded and led Kirishima past the desk towards the stairs. As they passed by the kitchen, Izuku swung one of the doors open and snagged a tray of takoyaki from a passing chef, along with a box of toothpicks from a nearby shelf. Kirishima frowned. Are you sure that's okay? We're technically visitors here, bro. Izuku grinned and handed the box of toothpicks to his classmate. It's fine. Fat Gum does it all the time, and the interns often pop in for a quick snack. Besides, I'm a familiar face. He led the way to the stairs, grabbing a toothpick out of the box and stabbing it into a ball of takoyaki, immediately popping it in his mouth and chewing. Oh yeah. Amazing as always. These guys really know their takoyaki. He stabbed another ball of fried octopus and offered it to Kirishima. Go ahead, have one. Maybe blow on it first, though. TS pretty hot. By the time they'd gotten to Fat Gum's office on the top floor, the two of them had finished the tray of takoyaki, Izuku having taken 4 of the 6 rows on the metal plate. Izuku dumped the tray into a nearby chute and flicked his toothpick into a nearby trash can, before grabbing the handle of one of the doors and pulling it open. Fat Gum glanced up from his desk, grinning as he saw the newcomers. Midoriya. Good to see you again. It's great that Nezu let you come back here for work studies. I'm guessing this is your classmate that you told me about. Izuku nodded, and Kirishima stepped forward with a grin. Kirishima Ajiru, also known as Red Riot, sir. Fat Gum waved a hand dismissively. Ah, forget the sir. We're pretty informal around here. He placed his hands on his hips. So. I'm familiar with Midoriya, but not so much with you. I remember you from the sports festival tournament, but I don't know the specifics of your quirk. Hit me with the details. Kirishima held up his right hand, hardening the individual fingers into claws in a shower of sparks. My quirk is called hardening. It lets me harden any part of my body to be as tough as solid rock, and potentially even harder with more training. Fat Gum rubbed at his chin and nodded. Interesting. You'd definitely get valuable experience if you got a work study here. But why should I take you on as an intern? I've already got multiple sidekicks and 2 interns I know are useful. What would you bring to the table? Kirishima slammed his left fist into his chest. I promise to protect everyone I see, from any danger that might come their way. I'll be a solid wall that'll weather the toughest storms. Fat Gum chuckled. I like your attitude, kid. You've got guts, and a good head on your shoulders. Now, let's see if you can measure up. Kirishima paused. Sir. Fat Gum grinned. Here at my agency, everybody needs to pull their own weight, no matter when that happens to be. Either out on patrol, in the office, or even in the kitchen. As a result, I need to make sure you can keep up with everyone else's pace. A bead of sweat rolled down Kirishima's neck. What does that mean? Fat Gum grinned wider and produced 5 skewers of various meats from behind his back. Above all else, we here at the Fat Gum Agency have to be able to eat fast on the go, so that we're fueled up whenever and wherever we need to be. Here's your test. If you can finish these 5 skewers within 5 minutes while running on a treadmill, I'll sign your paperwork and take you on as an intern. Kirishima pointed at Izuku. What about Mido bro? Doesn't he have to go through the same process? Izuku grinned and pulled 5 empty skewers out of his back pocket. Why did you think I insisted that we run from the station to the agency? Had to get my application in early so that I could watch you try it? One of the sidekicks told me about the initiation when I was here for internships. Fat Gum smirked and plucked the sticks out of Izuku's hand, depositing them into a chute by his desk. Good work, save point. Vibe check notified me of your success once you entered the building. Let's see if your classmate is just as good. Katsuki crossed his arms as he and Yurika stood by the front doors of Ryukyu's agency. Where the hell is the fairy queen? She said we had a meeting with Ryukyu at 10, and we're here at 10, so where the hell is she? Yurika huffed. With her, there's no way to know. You saw how over the place she was when she and her classmates showed up to talk about these work studies. Based on how naturally it happened, I'm guessing she's like that all the time. Suddenly, the intercom by the door buzzed, and a woman's voice announced, "You would be correct. Nejire-chan informed me that the 2 of you would be here around this time, and I didn't think I could count on her to be here on time, given her nature. Please, come in." The front door clicked, and Katsuki huffed, grabbing the handle and swinging it open. Figures. So, what do we gotta do? The Dragoon hero walked out from a side room, arms crossed. Well, if I'm going to take you on as interns, you'll need to prove that you can contribute to the agency. This isn't like internships, Work-study interns have the same responsibilities as sidekicks, barring patrol schedules. The two of you need to show me that you can pull your own weight. Katsuki crossed his arms. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "How'd you like an extra model for Dragoyer?" The heroine paused. "Pardon?" Katsuki smirked. "If you accept, Hada Mitsuki will model for Dragoyer for 4 weeks." Ryukyu fell silent for a couple seconds, before huffing. "Only if Bakugo Masaru agrees to collaborate on the designs for the same length of time." Katsuki nodded. "Deal." Ryukyu smiled, before turning to Yurika. "Well? What can you contribute?" The girl glanced around the room, before frowning. "The interior seems a little confined, especially considering your quirk. How'd you like a remodel by the Yurika Construction Company for a 50% discount?" Ryukyu tilted her head curiously. "Not for free." Yurika scoffed. "Girls gotta eat." Ryukyu smirked. "How true. In that case, you have a deal. Welcome to the Ryukyu agency." Tenko frowned. "You're saying who contacted you, trying to find me?" Jiren sighed. "The head of the Shihasaikai Yakuza family. He claims he's going to be the next ruler of the underworld, and he needs all for one's resources to do it. In exchange, he'll get rid of your quirk." Chapter 39. Fat Gum popped a ball of takoyaki in his mouth as he walked down the street. "YC, us heroes patrol during the day for 2 reasons. Riot, care to hazard a guess what those reasons are?" Kirishima frowned, swallowing his own ball of fried octopus. "Well, one of them's gotta be to keep crime rates down, right?" Izuku nodded as he stabbed a toothpick into his own tray. "Right. And the other is to make the public feel safe." Fat Gum nodded. "Exactly. When heroes are on patrol, civilians can look at them and think, okay, we're safe if something goes down. And criminals will say, uh-oh, there's a hero there if I try something. It works both ways." Kirishima hummed as he considered that. "That makes a lot of sense. But I thought it was our job to stop the criminals when they commit crimes. Why would we want them to wait until we're not out and about?" Fat Gum stuck a finger up. "Ah. See, that's where the other side of the spectrum comes in. Us limelight heroes patrol during the day and discourage crimes while we're out, so that underground heroes can catch them while they're committing crimes at night." Kirishima snapped his fingers. "Ah. Like how Eraserhead tends to patrol around Present Mix Agency and catches criminals that would have seen Present Mike during the day." Fat Gum grinned. "Exactly." Kirishima gestured at the bright lights all around them, lighting up the night sky over Isuha City. "So then, why are we patrolling at night, if limelight heroes are supposed to discourage crimes during the day?" Fat Gum chuckled. "Well, we've gotta do something to get paid. In order to look like we're actually doing our jobs, we've gotta catch a few criminals every now and then. Can't leave them all for the underground heroes, otherwise the HPSC would think we're just sitting around wasting tax money." Amajiki pulled his hood lower over his head as he walked behind the three. "I don't want to think about upsetting the commission." Kirishima frowned. "You okay there, bro?" Izuku sighed. Being in public makes Amajiki-senpai nervous. If he's by himself with close friends, then he's a lot better, but if he's around people he doesn't know, he clams up. Which includes every time he goes on patrol. Fat Gum is working on it. The hero sighed and nodded. "We're getting there. I mean, he made a lot of progress while, well, you know." Izuku nodded solemnly. "Maybe coming back here for work studies was a bad idea. I keep getting reminded that Momo's not here to enjoy this with us." He was broken out of his thoughts by the sounds of fighting coming from up ahead. Fat Gum quickly polished off his tray of takoyaki and tossed it at a nearby trash can as he started running. "That's never good. We get a lot of gang violence around these parts, but it's been getting worse recently." Izuku stuffed the remainder of his own tray in his mouth and tossed it towards the same trash can, jumping up and holding his right arm out towards the edge of a nearby rooftop. "Good thing I started that game last weekend." Spider-Man's web shooters appeared on his wrists, and he latched onto the rooftop, swinging over the crowd. He was aware of Kirishima and Amajiki running after Fat Gum on the ground. In only a few seconds, he'd reached a break in the crowd. A large circle had been cleared out, and several gang members were brawling it out in the cleared area, and quirks were definitely being thrown around. Quickly scanning the area, Izuku sighed with relief upon seeing that no bystanders had been injured. He fired off several web shots, sticking each combatant to either the road, a vendor's booth, or the odd fire hydrant. He dropped to the road just as the others caught up to him. He tossed a thumbs up in Fat Gum's direction. They were using their quirks, so I thought it was appropriate to intervene. Nobody has been injured, and all of the combatants have been contained. Fat Gum nodded. Good work. He turned towards the struggling gang members. Now, what the heck happened for you idiots to start fighting in the middle of the market? One of the guys shouted, they were selling on my turf. I couldn't let that slide. Another guy shouted back, oh, come off it. Your turf is all the way over in Tokyo. Isuha is our territory. Izuku sighed and webbed both guys' mouths shut. Well, it doesn't matter who started it at this point. All of you are going in for illegal quirk use in public, which might be upgraded to assault and battery depending on your injuries. If you want to minimize your sentences, I suggest you keep your mouths shut, yeah. Or, better yet, don't pull this shit. Suddenly, all of his senses screamed at him to move, and a gunshot rang out. His mind kicked into overdrive, taking in every bit of detail it could all at once. Shit. I'm not in a good position to dodge. Bullet's already on its way. Volume suggests it's someone in the crowd. Seems to be someone standing in a side alley. Which direction? He felt a light impact against his left shoulder. Thankfully, his vest held strong, and the bullet simply hung from the fabric without touching his skin. Wait. Shouldn't it have bounced off? Crap, no time for that. Who shot it? He whirled on the spot, eyes immediately locking onto a man standing in a side alley and holding a smoking gun. Bad idea. The man took a couple steps back, before turning on his heel and sprinting headlong down the alleyway. Before Izuku could make a move, Kirishima ran after the guy. Huffing, Izuku reached back with his right hand and removed the bullet from his left shoulder. Instead of a regular, solid bullet, it was a small red cylinder with a needle in one end, a syringe. Izuku hummed, before glancing over at Fat Gum. We need to get this thing to the police for analysis. Suddenly, a loud screeching sound caught his attention. He dropped the bullet into Fat Gum's massive hand and sprinted down the alleyway, pausing when he noticed the tableau in front of him. The guy with the gun now had several long blades sprouting from just about every conceivable point on his body. The blades were scraping against the walls of the alley, generating that loud screeching noise. The only thing standing between the thug and the civilians was Kirishima. As Izuku stepped forward, the thug shouted wordlessly, and blades shot outwards, aiming straight for the redhead. Izuku dashed forward, his Hylian shield manifesting on his left arm. But he knew he wouldn't make it in time. And Kirishima couldn't handle that many blades by himself. I can't fail the class. Not again. Red Riot, unbreakable. Katsuki grunted as he soared through the air. What the hell are these guys up to? It's prime patrolling time, did they think they wouldn't get noticed by the heroes? The two giant villains paid him no attention, locked in their battle in the middle of Nagano. Eureka shot into the sky on the other side of the conflict. This doesn't seem like a typical battle of giant quirks. These guys are a lot bigger than those usually get. That, and they seem a lot more mindless. One of the villains roared, and Katsuki narrowed his eyes at the giant's black tongue. At least one of them is on trigger. Probably both. But we can't let them work it out of their systems, or the city's gonna get wrecked. Fairy Queen giggled as she flew up above the squabble. Then let's knock them down a little early. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Eureka grinned over at Katsuki, who returned the expression. Together, they flew down close to the giant's legs. Eureka shot one of her cables over, and Katsuki grabbed it. The line went taut just as Fairy Queen shot both giants in the face with her quirk, and they stumbled backwards over the line, falling to the ground with a massive thud. Ryukyu appeared in her dragon form and landed on the thugs' faces, knocking them out cold and finishing the fight. As the thugs shrank back down to normal size, Katsuki and Eureka walked over and checked their mouths. Sure enough, both tongues were pitch black. Ryukyu huffed. Trigger. Of course. That damn drug is never fully off the market. Katsuki scoffed. Of course not. People with weaker quirks are always gonna look for a way to make them stronger, and nobody can resist a quick, easy solution, even with the drawbacks it carries with it. The heroine nodded as Fairy Queen dropped to the ground and slapped a pair of handcuffs on each unconscious villain. Sad, but true. Good work, you two. Mirako taught you both well. You might even be able to help with that case. Katsuki crossed his arms. What case? Ryukyu sighed. Sir Nitai over in Tokyo has asked my agency to help out with a case involving a Yakuza family that's heavily involved in the drug trade. Since we've been getting a lot of trigger cases here in Nagano, he figured it might be connected. Katsuki grunted. Makes sense. Eraserhead always says that crime never exists in a vacuum. Better to be safe and assume it's a big ring but have it be two different ones, rather than prepare for two smaller ones and have it be a big one. Ryukyu hummed. Precisely. I also heard that he's been trying to recruit Fat Gum to the case, considering the rise of gang activity in Isuha. Don't you two have a couple of classmates working with him? Katsuki nodded. Red Riot and Save Point, yeah. Yurika slammed a fist into her palm. Well, if there's a chance of stopping this thing from getting any bigger, I say go for it. Leave them alone, and they could get out of control really fast. Katsuki chuckled. And because Isuha's a little too close to me for your liking. She snorted. And that? Toshinori poked his head into Mirai's office. You wished to talk to me? The younger hero glanced up from his desk. Toshinori. Yes, please come in. Toshinori stepped into the office, shutting the door behind him. He would never get used to how much All Might memorabilia his former sidekick had displayed in the most important room of the agency. Ignoring the fanboy's paradise around him, Toshinori pulled up a chair in front of the younger man's desk. So, what did you want to discuss? Mirai frowned, tapping away at his keyboard. Mirio had a strange encounter on patrol the other day. He happened to run into the subject of my current investigation, the head of the Shihasaikai, and a young girl that the man claimed is his daughter. But from the descriptions Mirio gave, she doesn't look like they could be biologically related. I'm worried that he may have kidnapped the girl to keep up appearances, and for a potential hostage should a hero confront him in public. Toshinori frowned, snagging the incident report from Mirai's desk and skimming through it. I'm afraid it may be more than that. Young Togata also noted how the girl had bandages covering her arms and legs, and she was wearing a hospital gown with no shoes. It's possible that this man might be experimenting on her. For what purposes, I'm not sure. The phone rang, and Mirai picked it up. Nitai Agency, Sir Nitai speaking. Ah, greetings, Fat Gum. How might I help you? You believe you have new information about my case on the Shihasaikai. One of your interns was almost shot. That's awful. I'm sorry, the bullet contained what? And the man said it was supposed to do what? I see. I'll get back to you in a couple days once I have sufficient information. The hero hung up and immediately buried his face in his hands. Toshinori frowned. What happened? Mirai glanced over at the older man. On patrol, Fat Gum and his interns ran into a gang fight, and they broke it up with little issue. However, another gang member hiding in an alley attempted to shoot one of the interns, save point. However, the bullet was stopped by his costume, and the thug was apprehended by a different intern, Red Riot. However, when the police analyzed the bullet, they found that it contained human DNA, which didn't correspond to anyone in the system. In addition, when questioned, the thug admitted that the bullet was supposed to briefly erase the target's quirk. Toshinori went pale. The girl. She must have been placed in the head's care at a very young age, too young to be in the system. And the thug was connected to the Shihasaikai. Mirai nodded wordlessly, staring down at the file on his desk. After a little bit, the younger hero straightened and looked Toshinori in the eyes. I need to find their base, and a way inside. We have to take them down, not just to dismantle the drug ring, but to save that girl. Toshinori nodded, expression serious. Prioritize the rescue. 1 week later. Izuka raised an eyebrow as Katsuki and Yurika got onto the same train as him and Kirishima. We're all going to Tokyo? Weird. Isn't Ryukyu's agency in Nagano? Katsuki grunted. Must be the case Ryukyu mentioned last week. Something must have happened. Izuku hummed. Probably related to the thing that happened with me and Kirishima. I remember Fat Gum saying he needed to call Sir Nitai. And Nitai's agency is in Tokyo, isn't it? Yurika nodded. Looks like things are escalating. Guess we'll find out when we get there, huh? As soon as they arrived at the agency, they were met by Togata, who escorted them to a conference room filled with several heroes. Several eyebrows were raised at the presence of Aizawa-sensei and Hitachi. The hero shrugged. I was called in due to my expertise in an area that's related to the matter at hand. You'll find out more once the conference starts. After a few minutes of waiting, Sir Nitai walked in and sat down at the head of the table, his back to the giant monitor. Thank you all for coming. All of you have been called in for a reason, but I doubt any of you know the full story. He clicked a button on a remote, and the monitor flickered on to reveal a symbol that looked like a flower with 8 blocky petals. For the past few weeks, I've been running a case on the actions of the Shihasaikai Yakuza family. I've suspected them of being involved in the drug trade, but several events during the past week have made me aware of just what they might be planning. Izuku frowned. Yakuza, huh? That is not where I was expecting this to go. Should prove interesting, at the very least. The hero clicked a button, and the screen changed to show a profile shot of a man with dark brown hair and golden eyes, wearing a red and gold plague doctor mask. This is Chisaki Kai, also known as Overhaul. He is the current head of the Shihasaikai. However, recent developments have elevated him to S-rank villain status. He clicked the remote, and the screen changed to reveal a snapshot from a security camera outside an alleyway. The photo showed Togata, in his hero costume, talking to Overhaul, with a small girl in a hospital gown clinging to the student's leg. The entire room breathed in sharply, and Nitai nodded. Indeed. Overhaul is currently in possession of a young girl, seemingly 6 years in age. Furthermore, it would seem Overhaul is currently experimenting on her, indicated by the bandages around her arms and legs. However, the intent of this experimentation was unknown until an incident with Fat Gum and his interns last week. Fat Gum stood up. Last week, my interns and I were on patrol when a gang fight broke out. Save Point managed to stop the fight quickly and painlessly, but a hidden gang member attempted to shoot him. Due to his costume, however, the bullet did not actually hit him, and thus it could be analyzed. Sir Nitai clicked the remote, and the screen showed a diagram of the bullet, indicating the container and needle. Fat Gum continued, it's worth noting that the shape and size of these bullets mean that any random thug with a pistol could theoretically dose any civilian, villain, or hero with any liquid drug before anyone could react. However, what's more concerning is what the police found inside the container: human blood. Specifically, blood with DNA that seemed to match that of a young girl. Now, what were we just talking about? Several heroes' eyes widened as the implications set in. Fat Gum nodded and continued, now, the most worrying part about this is what the effects of the drug would have been. After questioning the thug that had shot the bullet, he revealed that it was supposed to temporarily erase the target's quirk. Gasps were heard, and several sets of eyes shifted to Aizawa-sensei, no, Eraserhead, who took that as his cue to stand as Fat Gum sat down. I was called in due to my experience in this field. Unfortunately, this method and mine are too different for my experience to be much help. Sir Nitai frowned. Explain, please. Eraserhead nodded. The way my quirk works is by emitting a specific frequency that blocks the neural pathways in a person's nervous system that allow them to activate their quirk. Since people with mutation quirks don't activate them, per se, I can't erase their quirks. After getting in touch with the police, we tested the effects of the bullet on a volunteer. Hitachi raised his hand. I was the volunteer. Eraserhead nodded and continued, Recovery Girl discovered that, when the drug is administered, it damages the quirk factor itself, rather than cutting off the connection between the quirk factor and the brain. However, the damage from the drug was minimal, and Hypno's quirk factor completely restored itself within 24 hours. He sat back down, and Ryukyu raised her hand. What does this have to do with me and my interns? Sir Nitai nodded at her. After we found that the thug in Isuha had connections to the Shihasaikai, we questioned the giant villains from Nagano. Apparently, the trigger they had used had also come from the Shihasaikai. Izuku smacked a fist into his palm. Sell the quirk enhancements to the villains, so that when they become too strong to handle, you can sell the quirk inhibitors to the heroes. Control the conflict on both sides, and eventually bring the Yakuza back to their former power. Sir Nitai hummed. That is one possibility, yes, but there was one more piece of information that raised this to S-rank priority. One of the doors to the conference room slid open, and Shimura walked in, wearing Quirk suppressing handcuffs. As it turns out, Overhaul hasn't gotten the memo that I defected from the league. He's asking around the underground, trying to find me so he can get access to my old boss resources. Supposedly, he wants to rise up to become the new king of the underworld, which fits the whole bring the Yakuza back thing, but his offer seemed a little weird. Apparently, if I helped him, he'd get rid of my Quirk. Now, if he was just gonna sell the temporary Quirk blockers, why would he phrase it like he could get rid of it permanently? Izuku's eyes widened. The girl. He's harvesting her blood, turning it into the Quirk erasing drugs. And he's trying to perfect the formula to make permanent Quirk erasers. Shimura nodded. I called in a favor with a broker, and I got some info on Overhaul. Apparently, the guy's a huge germaphobe. Obsessed with keeping everything clean. You've heard of the theory that Quirks were originally a disease passed on from rodents, right? Well, what do you think would happen if someone who hates disease caught wind of that theory? Kirishima slammed a fist on the table. He's trying to get rid of Quirks everywhere, permanently. Sir Nitai nodded. Precisely. Which is why I've called in all of you. We need be powerful heroes to raid the main location, along with local heroes to stake out the other locations without raising too much suspicion. I've already looked into as many possible locations as I could, and I believe I have found their main base, but I need to use my Quirk on a member to confirm this. One of the local heroes, which Izuku recognized as Mr. Brave, asked, your Quirk lets you see the future, right? Why don't you use it on one of us before the raid to see how it will go, so we can change our strategies to ensure victory? Sir Nitai shook his head. My Quirk does not function that way. I can only see a single person's future from their perspective for 1 hour, and I must wait 24 hours after that until I can use it again. Furthermore, any future that I view through foresight becomes set in stone, and cannot be changed. I will only use my Quirk at a point when we can ensure the maximum possible chances of success. Another hero, who Izuku recognized as Rocklock, glanced over at Togata. If you ran into this girl last week, and you knew the guy was a Yakuza head, why didn't you take her then? A loud slam drew everyone's attention to where Izuku was standing up, both hands on the table as he glared at the hero. Enough. We're not going to get anywhere if we make accusations about what could have been. The past is in the past, and if there was a mistake, deal with it. Togata-senpai may have had his reasons for not acting when he ran into her, but that doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is that we put everything we have into making sure Overhaul can't get away and continue torturing her. It doesn't matter that she wasn't saved then, because we'll save her now. And we will save her. Chapter 40. Izuku fiddled with his costume, double-checking to make sure everything was in working order. Kirishima stood next to him, testing the various functions on his visor. They stood behind Amajiki and Fat Gum, who were silently preparing themselves. Off to the side stood Ryukyu, Heidu, Okako, and Katsuki. Eraserhead and Hitachi stood near the back, silently furling and unfurling their capture scarves in unison. Sir Nitai and Togata stood at the front, ready to move at any time. Various local heroes and police officers were interspersed among the raid team, including Detective Tsukachi. The investigative hero glanced at the detective and nodded once. Tsukachi turned to a nearby police officer and gave a thumbs up. The officer walked up to the gate and pressed a button on the intercom, holding up a piece of paper. Tokyo Police. We have a warrant to search the grounds on suspicion of possession of illegal substances. The gate exploded, and a massive man wearing a plague doctor mask burst out, arms already swinging. Leave us alone. Izuku fell into a battle-ready stance, already on edge. Katsuki Murkiya. He drained stamina through skin contact. Immediately, Ryukyu lunged forward, shifting to her dragon form mid-strike and quickly pinning the large thug to the ground. Ryukyu Agency, with me. The rest of you, get inside. The raid team charged onto the premises, dispatching small-time thugs as they went. Nitai took the lead, directing the group through the hallways until they stopped in front of an inconspicuous cabinet. Nitai opened a hidden passageway, and 2 more thugs leaped out, only to be quickly restrained by Bubble Girl and Centipede. The woman shouted, "Go, we'll hold them here. We'll catch up when we can." The team filed into the underground maze, Nitai once again taking the lead. Unfortunately, they quickly came upon what seemed to be a dead end. Rocklock shouted, "Did we take a wrong turn?" Togata moved forward and stuck his head through the wall, before pulling it back out. No, there's still a hallway on the other side. Overhaul must have thrown up thin walls to block our progress. Nightai ordered, Lemillion, move ahead of us and stall him for as long as you can. We can't let him escape with the girl. The older student nodded and dove through the wall, his mentor catching his discarded visor. Kirishima charged forward, his fist hardened and ready to punch through the wall. However, the walls, floor, and ceiling started shifting wildly, throwing the entire raid team off balance. Eraserhead shouted, "This has to be the work of the director, Ironica Joy." Rocklock shouted back, "I thought he couldn't enter anything bigger than a refrigerator." Izuku called out, "They sell Trigger. Do you really think they wouldn't use their own product when they're under attack?" The floor disappeared, and the team nimbly dropped to the room below, where 3 figures were waiting for them. Unfortunately, Izuku recognized them from the briefing. Setsuno Toya, Hojo Yu, and Tobi Saramitsu. Could be trouble. Setsuno cackled. "You're pretty well informed, hero brat. But pure information won't help you all that much." Hojo grew crystals on his arms, smashing them together. "The boss wants you to stop, so you stop." Eraserhead scowled. "We don't have time for this." In the blink of an eye, all 3 thugs were wrapped in his capture scarf and slammed together, tied up in a heap on the floor. The hero moved past them, quickly knocking out Tobi as he passed. "Somebody needs to stay here and keep an eye on them." Amajiki stepped up. "I'll do it." Kirishima glanced at the upperclassmen nervously. "Are you sure? There's 3 of them, and only one of you." Izuku laid a hand on his classmate's shoulder. "Sunita's part of the big 3. Trust him to be able to handle himself, yet." Kirishima nodded, before running after the rest of the raid team. Izuku watched him go, before glancing back at Amajiki. "You'd better stay alive. I hate breaking promises." Tamaki smiled as Midoriya ran off after the others. "He's so bright. Just like Mirio." Setsuno began climbing to his feet. "Man, they don't even care about us. It's like they think we're weak or something." Hojo grumbled as crystals started forming on his upper body. "Maybe we're trash, but together, we're strong trash." Tamaki readied his quirk, feeling confidence surge through him. "I can't let him down." Ajiro glanced back down the hall nervously. "I still don't think it was a good idea to leave him back there alone, even if he is a 3rd year. Midobro huffed. "Focus, Riot. We've got a mission, here." Ajiro shook his head to clear his thoughts and focused on the hallway ahead. "You're right, bro. I can't get distracted now." He jumped forward and bashed through a wall, revealing another empty hallway on the other side. "Seriously? It's like they forgot about us entirely." Aizawa-sensei barked, "Don't let your guard down. Never assume the enemy doesn't know your position." Suddenly, a pillar of concrete shot out of the side wall, aiming for Aizawa-sensei. A hole opened on the opposite wall, and Ajiro reacted. He leaped forward, arm outstretched to push Aizawa-sensei out of the way, but Fat Gum beat him to it. Then there was nothing but stifling heat for a few seconds, until he and Fat Gum rolled out into a wide, dark room. As the large hero got off of him, Ajiro dusted himself off and glanced around the area. "All right, where do you think we are? And how do we get back to the others?" Fat Gum tensed and shouted, "Careful. We're not alone down here." Tensing, Ajiro scanned the darkness, and his visor activated its night vision. Immediately, he saw a buff man running towards both of them, and Ajiro's body moved on its own, darting in front of Fat Gum and hardening on instinct, going straight into Unbreakable. But he wasn't prepared for the massive force that slammed into his defenses, sending him sliding across the ground and crashing into the nearby wall. Through the haze of pain, he could see Fat Gum desperately trying to defend against a flurry of punches. "No. No. Not again. I'm not going to stand by when someone needs help." Unbidden, his mind flashed back to middle school. Of how he'd stayed back, afraid of the man towering over his classmates. Of how Mina had needed to jump in and redirect the man to the police station. Of how she'd been terrified throughout the entire thing and had collapsed once the man left. Of how she'd shouldered her fear and stood up for someone else anyway. "Never again will I let someone else get hurt because I stood back and did nothing." Izuku couldn't help the gnawing pit of worry in his stomach. They'd already left Okako and Katsuki at the gate, Bubble Girl and Centipede on the ground floor, most of the police force in that first underground room, and Amajiki in that room with the 3 members of the 8 Bullets. Then they'd lost Fat Gum and Kirishima, their 2 biggest tanks, to God knows where. And worst of all, Togata was nowhere in sight. He was snapped back to reality when a wall crashed down from the ceiling between himself and Eraserhead. Not wasting a second, he equipped the Ember Celica and blasted a hole through the wall, only to find Eraserhead standing over himself, oddly. The Eraserhead on the floor was clutching a stab wound in his side, and the Eraserhead still standing was holding a bloody knife. The healthy Eraserhead glanced back at him and grinned. This imposter almost got me, but I managed to get him in time. Come help me tie him up. A blast from the Ember Celica sent the healthy Eraserhead flying into a nearby wall, and the fake disintegrated into mush as Izuku dropped to his knees beside his teacher. Immediately pulling out a bandage, Izuku got to work right away. Eraserhead coughed and glanced up at him. How'd you tell? Izuku huffed. You don't use your knife unless you need to cut your capture scarf. Besides, I wouldn't need to help you tie someone up, like, ever. Whoever tried to make a fake you clearly doesn't know you very well. He finished tying the bandage and rocked back on his heels as the rest of the raid team caught up with the 2 of them. Are you healthy enough to fight? Eraserhead coughed into his fist, grunting when it came away red. No dice. That knife cut pretty deep, I'm out of commission for now. I'll live, but I can't fight. Izuku swore under his breath and glanced back at the others. Alright. Let's get out there and end this. Katsuki panted as the big guy finally went down. He leaned against the fence outside the compound, feeling his shoulders buzz from how many explosions he'd fired off at the fucker. Took him long enough. How much stamina did he drain from you, boss? Ryukyu huffed, leaning heavily on her front claws. Too much. I held him still for too long. I should have trusted you interns to hold him back more. Suddenly, Katsuki's vision blurred, and he nearly face-planted onto the grass. He could barely see Ryukyu fall, and the big guy started getting up again. Katsuki groaned. Oh, man. We put so much work into that, and then you just had to pull a full restore out of your ass. The fucker chuckled deeply, standing over Katsuki. Gotta love this new drug the boss cooked up. It's like all the benefits of Trigger, but with barely any of the side effects. I feel fresh as a daisy. Suddenly, there was a sharp twang, and the big guy screamed as electricity coated his body. After a few seconds, the charge cut off, and the fucker fell back down to reveal Pikachu standing behind him, finger gun still outstretched. Did somebody call for lights out? Katsuki coughed into his fist and tried to drag himself up the side of the fence. The fuck are you doing here, Sparky? A pair of hands grabbed his shoulders and held him up, and Katsuki forced his eyes open just enough to see Present Mike standing there in front of him. Shouta had a feeling things would go wrong, so he had me and my interns stand by as backup just in case. And his distress signal just went out, so here we are. Katsuki registered purple hair, a black vest, and a pink shirt standing next to the hero. Take a nap, Blasty. We'll take it from here. Mirio shot out from the floor, swinging his left fist at Chisaki's face. You're not taking her. He managed to leave a small scratch, and his right leg swung towards the lackey who was carrying Eri. The other man tried to hold Eri between the foot and his face, but Mirio activated his quirk in a precise manner that phased his foot through her head and hit the lackey square in the face. The second his feet were on the ground, he dove to the side and caught her, skidding across the floor and putting a good distance between himself and Chisaki. The Yakuza head reached up to his face and ran his finger across the thin scratch, which disappeared under his touch. You're fast. So annoying. Eri grabbed his costume and leaned in close. You can't. He'll make you go away. And it'll be all my fault. Mirio clutched her tighter. I don't intend to die here. And none of this is your fault, Eri. The only one at fault here is him. Chisaki huffed, his gloves disintegrating. Now, I can't have that. If you give her hope, she'll just keep trying to escape. Do you know how annoying it's been these past couple years? Always keeping her hidden. Never letting anyone know the truth about her. Constantly replacing her caretakers because they were so incompetent. It's such a pain. That girl is nothing but a burden, and her quirk is nothing but a curse. Why do you care so much about a girl you barely even know? Mirio's eyes narrowed. I'm a hero. Heroes always risk their lives for people they don't know. Besides, gotta keep the kids safe, or there won't be a future to look forward to. Chisaki scoffed. You don't have a future, regardless. I'll give you one last chance. Give Eri back to me, and I'll make your death quick and painless. If you don't, I'll be forced to get dirty. And I hate getting dirty. Mirio knelt his head to whisper in Eri's ear. When I put you down, I'm going to fight him. Once your feet are on the ground, run past me. I have some friends coming, they'll keep you safe. She clutched at his costume tighter. Don't. He'll kill you. Mirio gave her a reassuring smile. People have tried to kill me before. Nobody succeeded yet. He lowered his arms. The second her feet were touching the ground, he sank into the floor. A second later, he popped back up, delivering a mighty uppercut to the Yakuza head's jaw. Power. The gnawing pit in Izuku's stomach was growing with every step. Every corner turned might reveal a hallway splattered with blood. Every wall smashed might have another group of thugs hiding behind it. Every door opened could hold the mangled corpses of the police force. There was no way of knowing how everyone else was doing, and it was driving Izuku insane. I can't lose anyone else. I've already lost Momo because of my ineptitude, I can't let another of my classmates die because I fucked up. The Ember Celica clicked, and another wall was blown to pieces. Izuku winced as his shoulders tingled from the recoil. Hitachi glanced over at him as they continued running. You doing alright? Izuku grunted. Starting to feel the recoil, but I'm fine. Gotta keep moving. Can't let these fuckheads get away. Hitachi said nothing, simply turning his attention back to the hallway ahead. He tapped at the controls on the side of his visor, and his eyes widened. Incoming kid at 12 o'clock. The girl that Mirio had described came barreling out of the darkness straight into Izuku's legs, clutching at what seemed to be a torn piece of the older student's cape. Help. He's fighting on his own. He's going to die. Izuku gently picked her up and hugged her tightly, glaring into the darkness ahead. Don't worry. We're going to help him. He glanced back at where Erasehead, Nightai, and Tsukachi were standing by. Detective. Nightai. Eraserhead. Can I trust you three to get her back to the surface? Tsukachi nodded. You got it? Go kick his butt. Izuku glanced down at the girl, remembering that Mirio had said her name was Eri. Hey. Eri, right. She glanced up at him and nodded fearfully. Don't worry about Lemillion. He can handle himself. But I can't go help him if I'm carrying you. Can you go with these men? They'll take you back to our friends upstairs. She nodded again, and he passed her into the detective's waiting arms. As Tsukachi turned to head back in the direction they'd come from, the wall suddenly came alive and started shifting madly. Eri screamed as the detective lost his balance, and Izuku spun on his heel. His eyes scanned every available surface, and his gaze locked onto a spot overlooking the area that was suspiciously still. Found you. He vanished, reappearing by the ceiling a moment later. His right fist swung forward, and the explosion from the Ember Celica ruptured a hole in the cement. When the smoke faded, part of a man's body was visible. Eraserhead flashed his quirk immediately, and the walls froze. Izuku dug his arm through the cement and ripped Ironica Joy out of the ceiling. I've had enough of your shenanigans, dirtbag. Kyuka frowned as the ground suddenly stopped rumbling. What do you think's going on? Present Mike hummed. My guess is that the director boosted his quirk and was moving everything, but Shouta just stopped him. Kaminari cracked his knuckles. Whatever the case is, the way forward is clear now. Let's move. As they ran towards the gate, Kyuka couldn't help the gnawing worry settling in the pit of her stomach. You'd better be intact, Izuku. If you die, I'm going to find a way to resurrect you so I can kill you again. Mirio panted with exertion as he dropped from the ceiling, landing a good distance away from Chisaki. Of course, with how the giant room was currently filled with concrete spikes, there wasn't much of a safe spot to land. You're definitely the toughest villain I've faced, I'll give you that much. Chisaki huffed, hand brushing against a spike and disintegrating it. You're definitely one of the more annoying heroes I've had to deal with. However, it's obvious by now that you can't harm me for good. Surrender now, and I may spare your pitiful life. Mirio glared across the room at the Yakuza head. Never. A real hero never gives in. I'll put you down, even if it's the last thing I ever do. I'm not letting you lay your filthy hands on Eri ever again. Chisaki's eye twitched. Filthy? Me? Take a good look at yourself. You're infected. Consumed by a disease that twists and corrupts the minds of those under its influence. Heroes and quirks are nothing but a plague on this world, and I will give society the cure it so desperately needs. Mirio scoffed. Let's say, just for a moment, that you're right. That quirks are actually a disease. If you perfected your cure, would you remove your own quirk? Chisaki huffed. You wouldn't understand. I am far above you lowly peasants. Sometimes, one must shoulder the burden of infection to eradicate the rest of the plague. Mirio coughed and slowly pushed himself to his feet. You're right, I don't understand. I'll never understand the ravings of a lunatic. Chisaki scowled. Enough talk. Your pitiful life ends now. As they rounded the corner, Izuku felt his heart shoot straight into his throat. Togata was held in the air, suspended by a concrete spike. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade. Izuku's lungs failed. For a moment, he was back in the testing grounds, staring up at Momo's near-lifeless body. No. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Not again. I can't let another student die because I wasn't fast enough. He dimly noticed Chisaki turning on his heel to face the newcomers. And so, even more diseased heroes crawl out of the woodwork. Come. I will crush all of you under my heel like the filthy insects you are. Izuku's vision went red. He shot forward, a wordless roar erupting from his mouth. Crescent shots flashed across the room, slamming into the warped cement. Explosions from the Ember Celica decimated the nearby area. Billowing tornadoes of fire scorched the air and swirled across the floor, incinerating everything in their path. Izuku kept going, focus locked onto the man in front of him like a goddamn seeker missile. He was determined to end that motherfucker, no matter what it took. Chisaki. The villain's eyes filled with fear, and he hastily flung up a wall of concrete between himself and Izuku. Izuku's eyes narrowed, and a barrage of attacks crumbled the wall to bits. He narrowly dodged a spike of concrete stabbing at his face, and he charged forward. More spikes rushed towards him, but all of them were met with a wall of unrelenting force. Hitachi snagged Togata with his capture scarf and set him down as Izuku continued his assault. Every one of Chisaki's attacks or hastily constructed defenses were sliced, exploded, crushed, and incinerated almost as soon as they began. The Yakuza head kept backing away, attempting to put some distance between himself and the student, but to no avail. Izuku just kept going forward, filled with determination. You can't escape this, Chisaki. You sealed your fate the moment you decided to torture an innocent child for your own selfish gain. Chisaki took another step backwards, eyes widening as his back hit the wall of the room. He glanced back, before scowling at Izuku. This is not over. I will reclaim Eri. You will not keep her from me. He pressed his hand to the wall, and the ground rumbled. Several chunks of concrete tore away, swirling around Chisaki's body. His limbs tore themselves apart, fusing with the rubble. His torso floated into the air as his limbs reformed, now augmented by the cement from the wall. Chisaki towered over the assembly, glaring down at the heroes. I will not be disgraced. The Yakuza will return to their former glory, and I will cure humanity of the disease of quirks. Starting with all of you. There was a loud bang, and Izuku twitched, leaning his head to the side just a couple inches. Something flashed through the empty space, smacking into a raised spike and revealing itself to be a golden cylinder with a syringe in the end. Hitachi would later recount how Izuku's head had whipped around, his neck nearly snapping in half from the movement. Chronostasis froze, visible through the field of spikes with a gun in his hands. Faster than anyone could react, Izuku streaked over and slammed a fist into the thug's face, sending him flying into a wall and leaving an impact crater. Izuku swiveled on the spot, nearly frothing at the mouth as he glared at Chisaki. You're next, motherfucker. Chisaki scoffed and slammed a massive hand into a remaining section of the wall. The ceiling cracked and disintegrated into pieces, letting sunlight stream into the underground room. The walls began to crumble, robbed of their structural integrity. The giant boomed, "Come, then. Face me, filthy hero. I will annihilate every cell of your pathetic body." Izuku snarled, dropping his weapons. His hair glittered with growing green lights, as though he was trying to use his quirk. Unfortunately, the lights flickered, and Izuku stumbled, eyelids twitching as he struggled to stand. Hitachi swore under his breath. He's out of fuel. Izuku reached for one of his pockets, only for a spike of concrete to rush out of the ground, piercing him through the arm and pinning him to the wall behind him. He cried out in pain, and his screams grew louder as Chisaki pinned his other 3 limbs to the concrete, one by one. The giant chuckled darkly, taking a massive step forward. A pity. You used up the last of your strength before our battle could even begin in earnest. The ground shuddered, and the floor exploded, sending the other heroes flying towards the other walls. Chisaki strode forward, one massive hand reached for Izuku's prone form. Die, filthy hero. Izuku glared up at the massive form, only for his eyes to lock onto something behind Chisaki. His pained scowl morphed into a smug grin. Not quite yet. Chisaki paused as several quiet guitar notes echoed through the air. The giant turned to see a small figure standing by the edge of the pit. A girl, dressed in a black hero costume. Purple hair, a deep scowl, and 2 cords going from her earlobes into the silvery guitar in her hands. One hand raised into the air, a silvery guitar pick glinting in the sunlight. Get your goddamn hands away from my boyfriend. Kyuka swiped the pick across the strings, and the speakers in the guitar's bass, fueled by her quirk, amplified the sound several times over. A wave of force slammed into Chisaki, sending him crashing through the underground maze. Izuku fell to the ground as another rip destroyed the spikes pinning him to the wall. He clutched at the holes in his arms, grinning up at his girlfriend. Thanks for the assist, Kyo. She tossed up a 2-fingered salute. Go kick his ass, babe. Izuku nodded and turned on his heel, darting off after the Colossus. As he ran, he snagged a gamer bar from his jacket, tearing open the wrapper and downing it in one massive bite. The rumbling quieted down, only to be replaced with a rhythmic thumping. Chisaki's massive form lunged out of the darkness, his giant foot stomping down and making the earth shudder. Filthy heroes. I'll destroy you all. Izuku tossed the wrapper aside, his hair glowing brightly. In that moment, he barely felt the blood flowing from his arms and legs. In that one moment, the only thing on his mind was the enemy in front of him. Green light filled his hair, then grew to cover the rest of his body. Chisaki snarled and swept a massive hand forward, only for it to be knocked back by a green ball of energy. The light surrounding Izuku's body burst away in small orbs, revealing that he now sported golden gauntlets around his arms, along with 4 additional golden arms sprouting from his back. Izuku launched forward, his 6 hands bunched into fists. His arms blurred, and a barrage of green energy blasts ripped Chisaki's arms to shreds. As the villain fell to his knees, Izuku planted his feet on the giant's hips and grabbed Chisaki's torso with his 6 hands. Roaring, he pulled backwards and sent the man flying back the way they'd come, crashing into the earthen wall of the room mere seconds into his flight. Chisaki's body dropped from the wall, his arms and legs mere stumps. In a flash, Izuku was standing over him, golden arms at the ready. Do you concede? The villain glared up at him. I will never admit defeat. As long as I have the strength to move, I will not give in. Izuku shrugged and cracked his knuckles. Suit yourself. In the blink of an eye, 4 hands were latched onto Chisaki's body. With barely a second thought, Izuku tossed the villain up, easily clearing the surrounding buildings and soaring into the sky. His legs tensed, and he shot up after the man, feeling the power well up in his new limbs. As Chisaki's ascent halted, Izuku appeared above him, right fists cocked. A mighty combined blow sent Chisaki hurtling back down. The villain crashed into the street a few meters from the front gate. Izuku dropped to the street, watching the man like a hawk. When Chisaki didn't move, Izuku sighed with relief, the adrenaline bleeding out of every pore of his body. There was a flash of green light, and when it faded, the gauntlets and extra arms were gone. Izuku stumbled, before tipping to the side. He likely would have hit the pavement if Kyuka hadn't run up and caught him. As she gently lowered him to the ground, he forced his eyes open and stared up at her. Did we win? She smiled softly. You bet your ass we won. He smirked. Good. Bastard had it coming to him. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell unconscious. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.